Welcome to a Halloween edition of Monster Mondays, a series where I draw a D&D monster and I talk about their lore, their history in the real world, and what they're like to fight. This week I'll be talking about werewolves, but before I get started, if you enjoy the content that I make on this channel, please make sure to leave this video a little like, maybe share it with someone you know who might enjoy this, and subscribe for more content like this every week. We're a very new channel, we're just little werewolf pups ourselves, so anything you can do to help really goes a huge way. So we all know what a werewolf is, we know about the curse of lycanthropy, but D&D treats lycanthropy, treats werewolves a little bit differently to the way that you might expect. Now, lycan obviously means wolf, right? Has wolf-based origins, which is surprising because in D&D, the curse of lycanthropy can't just turn you into a werewolf, it can turn you into all manner of other things. Turns out the idea for werewolves was so successful, was so popular in the D&D community back in the day that by 1999, players would encounter or could be bitten by and turn into things like were-rats, tigers, bears, boars, sharks, jaguars, even were-rams, were-seals, were-bats, which you would have thought maybe was covered with vampires, but who knows? There's even were-owls. The list is pretty much endless. If there's some sort of animal that can give you a bite, I imagine you can have a were version of it, which is pretty weird. To flip the idea on its head, there's even wolf-wares, which is the unlikely event of a wolf that starts off as a wolf but can transform into a humanoid form, just like a werewolf, but it's kind of in reverse. Which begs the question, did they get bitten by a werewolf to turn into a wolf-were? Or was there just some sort of human who is infected with something that transferred this? Either way, if you want an easy cure for lycanthropy, you can become a werewolf, then get bitten by whatever human is carrying the reverse property of this, become a wolf-were-werewolf, and then I think you're just a human again. But despite all these many forms in D&D, all these weird and wonderful creatures that you can transform into in the style of a werewolf, lycanthropy, the word lycanthropos from the Greek literally just means wolf person. So although lycanthropy is the umbrella term for all of these, were creatures, the word literally just means wolf person. But where does the idea actually come from? I mean, if lycanthropy is based in Greek, maybe we need to look there. And we do have some early references to that effect. There's the Nuri, I think I'm pronouncing that right, N-E-U-R-I, the Nuri tribe of Scythia, which is basically kind of Eastern Europe and Russia kind of area now. The people of that tribe would once a year transform into wolves for several days. The idea for that was recorded in the 2nd century BC, so werewolves have a very ancient history in the real world. I've seen a lot of theories pointing towards Romulus and Remus being the origin for werewolves. Two boys that were raised by a she-wolf. In the wild, they were feral children and eventually went on to, as Romulus, the name would suggest, found Rome. Need to state, obviously, that they are mythological children. I doubt that there were actually two children that were raised by a wolf that founded a massive city. But despite being raised by the Capitoline wolf, this she-wolf, they didn't actually transform themselves. So we have this earlier reference that literally involves people transforming into wolves, seems very werewolf-like, and we have more kind of ancient Roman, ancient Greek culture telling us that there's a lot of wolf references, basically. But Romulus and Remus, although raised by wolves, they were feral kids, doesn't seem like they were actually transforming into wolves. There's another story coming from the same sort of area. It's a bit more of a vague area. I think it's a mythological place, basically. It's an ancient Greek myth stemming from a place called Arcadia, which is basically a kind of Elysium style, it's an unspoiled, naturally harmonious kind of utopia, basically, this place. It's located where apparently the modern Peloponnese kind of area is. And the king of this place, in this story at least, is called Lycaon. And basically, he was a bit of a smartass. In the story, he's convinced that the gods are fallible. In Greek mythology, the gods are very kind of human-like. They have human-like desires. Zeus fathers a dozen children, maybe more, with human people. They're constantly having contests and fights. They're very human. They're not perfect. They're just powerful. And Lycaon is a bit frustrated because Zeus is supposed to be all-knowing. He's supposed to be omniscient. And yet he behaves in a very human-like way. So he devises this trick to basically, trick or trap Zeus into admitting that he doesn't know everything. Now, on top of being a skeptic, Lycaon is apparently a horrendous human being with zero morals whatsoever, because he decides, instead of, going, "Hey Zeus, I have a deck of cards, tell me what's on the other side of these cards," and catching him out that way maybe, he decides, no, the only way to test whether or not Zeus knows everything is if I kill my son, cut him up into bits, my wonderful son Nyctimus, and I'll feed him to Zeus. Make a wonderful dinner, I'll offer him as a sacrifice. Zeus won't know that it's human flesh, and he'll partake, he'll eat it, and then I can whip the rug from underneath him and say, "Ha ha ha, you've just eaten my son." Obviously, that is the totally rational and reasonable thing to do. Now, unfortunately for Lycaon, as with a lot of these stories, trying to trick gods is not great. They're capricious, they're nasty, maybe not as evil as Lycaon himself in killing his son just for a test, but not great, okay? So Zeus figures this out pretty quickly, takes a little nibble, has a little sniff of this offering, and goes, "Hey, I know that smell, that's Nyctimus." I imagine at this point that Lycaon is maybe running for the door. This has backfired pretty tremendously, and Zeus decides that a fitting punishment, because of this barbaric atrocity for killing his own son for this test, and for trying to fool Zeus, he thinks, "I'm going to curse you. I'm going to turn you into the animal that you behave like. I'm going to turn you into a savage hunter. I'm going to turn you into a wolf. But I'm not going to just punish you, I'm going to punish your whole family. All of your children are going to be wolves as well." So this is definitely a curse. This is a curse transforming someone into a wolf. This seems like a really fitting origin for all werewolves for me. As well, all children having this kind of indicates that there's a bloodline. So if these children would then go and have offspring themselves, it kind of says that maybe their offspring would also turn into werewolves. That doesn't expressly say that, but it seems to fit the logic. And it would be a really good way, a really interesting way of having natural born werewolves. Because in D&D there's no mention of the first werewolf. I don't think anyone particularly knows, but not in any monster manuals that I've read has it mentioned that there is a originator, the first werewolf. Maybe there's an adventure that I've not played or something like that might do, but I couldn't find a reference to it. If you know, leave a comment down below, because that would be pretty interesting to learn. The interesting thing in D&D though is that there's pureblood werewolves. So essentially there are two ways of transmitting the curse of lycanthropy. You can either get bitten or scratched, as we all know, but a werewolf can mate with someone and then their offspring will also be a pureblood werewolf. So this fits this whole cursed by Zeus thing pretty well, the offspring also carrying the curse. Now there's a massive difference between pureblood werewolves and normal werewolves. They share the same stat sheet in the monster manual, but they have very different behavior. So a pureblood werewolf can shape change at will, which is very different from our modern understanding of werewolves. I think it's a really fascinating idea. The creators of D&D have clearly looked through a lot of myths and legends of people who could just transform into animals, and I think that's why there are so many different were creatures as well. But purebloods can transform at any time, and they don't have to just turn into this kind of half-human, half-wolf thing. They can transform into a traditional wolf, they can be human, or they can turn into this kind of hybrid form, getting different abilities at different levels. They can still speak, for example, when in their hybrid form and in their human form, but they can't when they are a wolf. If they bite someone while in their hybrid form or in their wolf form, they can transmit the curse. I think being able to turn into a wolf is a fantastic way of going about stealthy business. It doesn't say that you're any larger than a normal wolf or anything like that, so you can pretty much get through a city unnoticed. Certainly if you don't require a full moon to transform or anything like that. However, if you're cursed involuntarily, i.e. you're bitten by a werewolf, it kind of varies from what kind of were creature, a wereboar, for example, will gore you with its tusk and that'll transfer the curse to someone else. I don't imagine you're going to be waiting around for a were-ram to bite you, for example. I imagine it's going to bash you with its horns, things like that. But with a werewolf, if you get bitten, in some popular culture, but not in D&D, if you get scratched, you can also have the curse transfer. But cursed werewolves can either accept the curse, or they can deny it. If they accept the kind of inevitability of the curse, they are a wolf now, they are a werewolf, then they gain similar abilities to a pureblood. They grow to live with it, they just understand that they're going to have to be killing things from now on to survive. They may have a bit more of an animalistic nature, but eventually, over time, they will become accustomed to it. And with that comes an alignment shift, because they're essentially agreeing that they are okay with murder, with eating things to survive, hunting down and killing possibly humans and other humanoid sentient intelligent life, which is definitely an evil alignment in the D&D book. If you don't accept the curse, then you don't have to change your alignment when you're in your human form. when you transform, you obviously turn into a monster. It's not really your mind in there per se, so you behave very differently. You're an animal at that point. I would probably suggest, if I was role-playing a werewolf, either as a DM or as a player, that if I resisted this curse, I would say maybe I can't speak in any of my wolf forms because it's a different personality taking over. It's a more beast-like personality. Sort of like a Hulk transformation, you know. Bruce Banner doesn't tend to be able to speak through the Hulk, and a werewolf is so savage that maybe it doesn't end up speaking. So perhaps that would be an interesting distinguishing feature between a pureblood and a cursed person, is that cursed people, unless they live for a very long time and become accustomed to the curse and accept the curse for what it is, they can't really speak in their wolf forms, but a pureblood who can transform as freely as they like probably can. But what's the curse transfer like in D&D? Well, speaking for werewolves, if you get bitten, you make a saving throw, which kind of varies based on the wolf's level. For example, if you play a werewolf and you end up leveling up significantly, the difficulty rating for the bite is based on your proficiency bonus. So as you level up, obviously it'll get harder, and similarly with a werewolf that's attacking you. It does have a standard amount. Again, I'm not going to give you a spoiler here. If you end up fighting a werewolf, it should be a nice surprise, but it can be more difficult or more easy depending on what level you're fighting a werewolf. Now, if you fail this constitution saving throw, then you are infected. You are cursed, and it's definitely a curse, because if you are cursed in this way, a remove curse spell can remove the curse from you. Unless you're a pureblood. If you're born with this affliction, with this curse inside you, then it takes a wish spell to literally change it, because that's changing your whole species. You're not really cursed, you're a kind of cursed being, so you would need to essentially recreate yourself as another species, at which point you could pretty much ask to be anything. Now, if you are a cursed person, then you will transform at night into a werewolf, into either the wolf or the hybrid form, and this might happen without your knowledge. Now, the thing that bothers me a tiny bit about this curse is how easy it is to remove. Now, I admit, obviously, you could be bitten as a very low-level player, at which point, let's say you're not able to remove the curse. But there's bound to be a wizard on your party. It's bound to be. Once they reach third level spells, which they're going to pretty quickly, that kind of means that there's no threat to a werewolf. You can just remove curse, instantly done. I feel like that's a bit of a shame. I think what I would do personally in that situation is have a similar rule. I would homebrew this, and obviously your DM can decide, perhaps with agreeing with the players, but again, it's the storyteller's role. I would say a remove curse spell can remove the curse of lycanthropy from someone who's been bitten until they first transform. Once they've transformed, I would either make the curse drastically harder to remove, or I would make it a permanent feature of that character, requiring a wish spell to cure. It's a fantastic character arc if it happened, and I feel like it would be a shame to just kind of miss out on that by anyone who's able to cast third level spells going, that's gone now. But according to the rules, that is the way to do it. Personally, I would homebrew it the other way and just say, once you've transformed for the first time, that's it, you're set. Or maybe once you've transformed for a week, or once the first full moon appears, you are now permanently cursed, and no curse removal spell can cure you aside from a wish. Because the other part of this, again, is that you might be cursed without your knowledge. You don't really find out that you're cursed when you're bitten by a werewolf, especially if you don't know the difficulty rating. You could carry it, and that's that. Furthermore, if you resist this curse, i.e. you don't know about it, then when you transform during your next night, you could go out killing, there could be a huge rampage throughout the streets. It'd be an amazing story if you were to wake up from a night out, you just come back from the tavern, as far as you're aware, you don't feel very well rested, but you wake up and suddenly all the townsfolk are gathering, they hire your adventuring party because there's been a series of grisly murders throughout the town. You investigate, you find out some sort of beast is committing all these crimes, and little by little you begin to piece it together that you are in fact the creature that's doing this. Every night when you go to sleep you transform and you start murdering people. Do you then hide that from the rest of the party once you've discovered that? Do the party try and hide you? Do they protect you? If you have a lawful good person on the party, they'll almost certainly try and turn you in. Some interesting party conflict. Does your character just make restraints for themselves for future nights until they can eventually find some means of curing this? It could be a really fantastic story element, and a great driving force and motivation for the party. If your main story is kind of running a little bit dry, you suddenly instantly have an amazing quest to go and cure your friend of lycanthropy, which should be made fairly difficult, I think. An interesting quest. Now, I've kind of glossed over one thing. I've just said at night. because in D&D you transform at night. It doesn't specify a full moon, because I suppose maybe your world, the world that you've created, might not have full moons. It might not have moons in the traditional cycle. You might have 2 moons. How does that work? So to be better safe than sorry, and to make this occur fairly frequently, if you're cursed with lycanthropy and you resist the curse, you transform during at night. You transform at night, in general. But where does the full moon thing come from? Well, I think it's tied to the idea of mental illness. In many, many years gone by, we used to refer to someone who is suffering from mental illness as a lunatic. Luna as in the moon. And possibly this was based in hormonal changes in men and women once a month. I mean, obviously it's more obvious with women because there are menstrual cycles, there's a lot of hormone changes in the body, but men, it happens to us as well. We also have monthly hormone changes. It's just ours are slightly more, I suppose the phrase would be like vestigial. It's not useful for us and therefore doesn't really show up that much. But apparently men change their attitudes due to hormone imbalances on a monthly basis. And we used to associate all of these kind of behaviors, all these hormone changes, all these behavioral changes with cycles of the moon. So if someone was behaving really strangely, we would attribute it to the moon, say that they were maybe mad, and call them a lunatic because of Luna, the moon. But interestingly, there is evidence to suggest that during a full moon, certain mental illnesses like schizophrenia, I mean, there's been a couple of studies that have shown that schizophrenia patients exhibit 1.8% increased violent or aggressive behavior during a full moon. And there's also a mental illness called lycanthropy, called medical lycanthropy, just to make the distinction there from the supernatural. And it's where people literally believe that they are transforming into animals. They exhibit very, very strange behavior, very predatory behavior, often wanting to harm or kill things during their changed state. But what do they like to fight? Now, all the different were creatures are slightly different. They all have different challenge ratings, but we're focusing on the werewolves, so let's go for that. So werewolves are a challenge rating 3 creature, which is probably why a remove curse spell can remove the curse of lycanthropy, because it's early game when you fight one of these guys. The gloves have just come off, the DM bubble has just been removed, basically. You're no longer safe and protected while you're learning the game. You're coming into real D&D now, and you can fight some monsters with some real threats. Now, fighting a werewolf's a little bit complicated because they shapeshift. They have 3 different forms, and in those different forms they can do different stuff. So for example, when they're a human, they're just wearing normal human clothes. But then that armor class increases when they transform into a wolf or into their hybrid form. They move quicker when they're in a wolf form, for example, and they speak whatever languages they spoke before they were cursed. Now obviously if it's a pureblood werewolf, they only speak common, as the stat sheet suggests, but I would imagine if you were bitten as an elf, you can speak elvish, that kind of thing. You can't speak when you're in your actual wolf form though, not the hybrid form or the humanoid form, but when you're an actual wolf, you can't articulate. And shape-changing is super easy for a werewolf. Unless you're playing the sort of mindless beast version, then they can transform into any one of their forms, humanoid, hybrid, or wolf, in just one action. Interestingly, unlike a polymorph effect, the equipment that they're wearing doesn't transform with them. So if you are in humanoid form or in the kind of typical werewolf hybrid form and you have weapons and armor on, when you transform into a wolf, that doesn't come with you. Or if you transform into the hybrid form where you're a lot bigger than your normal humanoid form, that might tear the clothes, for example. Werewolves having unnatural, or maybe natural for a wolf, style senses always have advantage on wisdom perception checks that are related to hearing and smell. I covered it in the owlbear video talking about dogs and their ability to smell, but in case you haven't watched that one, dogs basically have 2 chambers in their nose that pick up different stuff. One chamber opens and closes very quickly to gather a lot of particles and is filled with smell receptors that make detecting things by scent very, very easy for dogs. I go into it in a little bit more depth in the owlbear video, so make sure to watch that one if you are more curious about that kind of stuff. In terms of attacks, in the humanoid or hybrid form, the werewolf can make 2 attacks. One of them is its bite, and one of them is with a claw or a weapon. Now, it doesn't specify whether or not the hybrid form can use weapons, but there's a lot of depictions of werewolves in their hybrid form wielding weapons and wearing armor. So I think it's safe to assume that if they can speak in that form, they're also intelligent enough to wield weapons, depending on whether or not they are resist curse or the pureblood form. They have a bite, which can only be used in the wolf or the hybrid form. This one deals d8 plus 2 piercing damage and also has the chance to inflict the curse on whoever is bitten every time the bite happens. So potentially, with its 2 attacks a turn, it could bite one person every round, or bite the same person multiple times. I mean, the wolf is not going to know whether or not it's cursed, so it might just keep trying. It has a claw attack, only in its hybrid form, and that deals 2d4 plus 2 slashing damage, so that's better than a lot of sort of rudimentary melee weapons. So if you don't have a really good weapon to hand as a werewolf, you can always use your claws. And then in the humanoid form, you can use a spear only. You can use that as a melee attack, or you can throw it. It has different values for each, plus 2 if you throw it or you use it with one hand, and it's 1d8 plus 2 if you use two hands. Pretty standard stuff, but a fun challenge if your party are around the level 3 mark anyway, with this addition of the possibility of becoming cursed. But the difficulty with werewolves comes in trying to kill them, because you've just turned level 3, you probably don't have any magic items, certainly won't have a magic weapon, right? It just so happens that werewolves have damage immunity, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, all that kind of stuff from non-magical weapons that aren't silvered. That's not just hard to hit these creatures, not hard to damage these creatures, it's impossible. You cannot harm them unless you have a silver weapon, or unless you use magic, or a magic weapon. Suddenly, the werewolf becomes a lot more difficult for your junior adventuring party. But where the hell did that come from? That's not something that's depicted in the ancient Greek myths. It's actually from a French story called La Bête du Gévaudan, or the Beast of Gévaudan, and is a sort of mythological creature. It's a man-eating grey wolf, supposed to reside in Gévaudan, basically in the south of France, somewhere in the 1700s. Later there was a book in 1935 with the same name, and in this story, the beast died in a similar sort of fashion. Someone used a silver weapon to kill it. I think the idea for that, using silver in particular, probably came about because a lot of German and Eastern European sort of cryptids and monsters and folklore creatures can't stand the touch of iron. Things like goblins and fairies and so on can't stand the touch of iron, it burns them. But I think werewolves having this vulnerability led to the idea, the modern sort of cultural idea that werewolves are immortal. There doesn't really seem to be anything in mythological history or in D&D. Certainly if you're a werewolf in D&D, you don't live any longer than a normal creature. You're not immortal whatsoever. You don't regenerate any faster than anybody else. This is all very new stuff, but it does take silver to harm you. And I think the way that that's come about is with this idea of silver being the only thing that can hurt them. That obviously, you know, if you hit with a sword, it connects and it damages the creature, and it must obviously heal if it didn't harm it, if that makes sense. And only silver would be able to keep the wound open, you know, damaging this thing permanently. Maybe that's how you want to flavor the fact that normal weapons won't harm a werewolf in your game. Seems totally reasonable for a magical curse. And I think these kind of regenerative properties is where the idea of immortality came from. You know, we see it with people like Wolverine, another wolf-based character in popular culture. You know, he regenerates, therefore, you know, aging is part of a decaying process, and if you regenerate quickly enough, maybe you don't age, and therefore you are kind of immortal. And I don't honestly know whether or not I would add that to my own stories. I've played campaigns where werewolves are immortal, and I've played campaigns where they're not. I would probably go with an extended lifespan, something akin to an elf, maybe. You regenerate enough that sort of time is unlikely to kill you. You regenerate quicker than a non-magical creature, basically a normal mortal. So people might actually want to become werewolves to extend their lifespan. An incentive to go about this, basically. Give another advantage to someone who has been bitten by a werewolf and is cursed. But you don't have to, it doesn't say anything about it in the rules. So it's entirely up to you or your DM, basically. But that's been the Werewolf, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, make sure to like this video, and maybe share it with someone who you think might enjoy it. If you're a fan of Monster Mondays, make sure to subscribe to this channel, because I literally do them every Monday. And I'd love to see you back here. Until next time, have a lovely Halloween, keep it spooky, and I'll see you later. Everything else.